I want to now take the opportunity to introduce you to our next keynote. He's an amazing person, Chief Technology Officer for Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And he's here to talk to you about some really important and inspiring things. So please join me in welcoming Steve Downs.
I'm going to give a talk about the interplay among tech and design and life and health. And I'm going to offer a perspective on how I think we can use technology to improve health. And I'm going to argue that there is an opportunity and also an imperative to go beyond, to improve health, going beyond just focusing on health and medicine directly, but actually using technology to reimagine and reshape the fundamentals of everyday life. Reshape the fundamentals of everyday life. So that's big. It's a challenge, and it's a daunting challenge, but it's one that I believe we need to take on, and take on with some urgency. So let me start with a macro view of health in the US. This is a slide some of you may have seen before. Yeah, this is from Max Roser, Our World in Data, and you can see life expectancy on the vertical, per capita healthcare cost on the horizontal. It's the top 20 or so industrialized nations, and you can see where the US is. We are last in life expectancy, but we are number one in spending. And that's not great, but that's 2014 data. So Eric Topol actually adapted it to show what Amy referred to, which is the last few years our life expectancy has actually gone down a bit. Spending continues to rise. So now you may say, yeah, those aren't necessarily the right metrics. What about something that's more focused on health? So let me do this one, which is a little bit of a complicated metric, but it is basically how healthy is the average 65-year-old in your country? And we're going to see how the US ranks in this. So maybe we're in the top 10. No. Top 20? Still no. 30? Well, you know where this is going, right? We're in the 40s, 50s, sorry, and one more. So there we are, 53rd. Okay. So this is pretty bad, right? Actually, you know, we can quibble about metrics and we can come up with some rationalizations, but this is awful, right? It's outrageous. It's not even remotely close to being okay. And it's not just numbers and dollars, right? These are lives, right? And I feel quite confident that anyone who's having tens of thousands of dollars of healthcare spent on them in a year is not feeling great today. There's all these complex interactions that lead to that, but at another level, it's simple, right? It's hard to be healthy, it's hard work, and a lot of that has to do with our lifestyles. And our lifestyles are shaped by things like predominantly socioeconomic factors, like poverty and housing conditions and neighborhood conditions. But it's also about culture and norms. And I want to show you this slide about obesity, and there are a couple of things to see on this. Obviously, the shape of the curve, right? It's a problem that's gotten worse and worse, and it's really taken off. The other thing to focus on is the time scale. If you see the beginning of that, I don't know how clear it is, but it's 1960. This is not that long ago. And again, this is 2014 data. It's a little old, but we've actually got an update on this from the CDC last year. 40% of American adults are now obese. Another approximately 40% are overweight as well. And this is basically what? 50, 60 years. It's 2 generations. And as my colleague Jim Marks used to say, the human genome doesn't change that fast. What's changed is the circumstances in which we live. And if you think about modern life and kind of the behaviors we've adopted, there's some weird ones, right? So we eat food in our cars. We binge watch Netflix. We spend hours trapped in these interesting steel and glass cages. We go to work and we sit like this often for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And it turns out these behaviors are not ideal for the human body. And what's happened is that we've actually changed the world. We've created this world at a rate and changed it at a rate that's much faster than our species can evolve. It's like we've created this world for which we're actually not suited. We're not optimized for the world we've built. And there's a terrific book I'd recommend by Dan Lieberman. He's an evolutionary biologist down the river here at Harvard. So Lieberman makes this point, right, that we're not evolved for the world we've created. And he goes on to say that the reason that we have so many conditions that were once very rare but are now very prevalent, conditions like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, depression, chronic pain, is the result of this fundamental mismatch between the world we've created and how we've evolved as a species. And so the way to think about this is almost as if when we're asking people to try to be healthy, when we're trying to stay healthy, it's like we're swimming upstream. And we're swimming upstream against currents that are getting stronger and stronger. And our response to this is often to tell people to swim harder, or maybe train them and give them more information so they'll become stronger swimmers. We've tried performance-enhancing drugs to make them better swimmers. And the latest thing is we've even given people Fitbits so they know just how much more swimming they have to do every day to stay afloat. But as you saw from all the data, it's not working. And it's time to think different. It's time, I think, to be much bolder and much more radical in our thinking. And the question I want us to ask is, what would it take to reverse the direction of the river? So we were swimming with the flow. So part of the problem, I think, is that we've been treating health like an app. Now, I don't mean literally like an app, although there is literally an app called Health. I mean it metaphorically. And what I mean is that treating it like an app says we leave intact all the fundamentals of everyday life. How we eat, how we sleep, how we move from place to place, how we entertain ourselves. And then we add this sort of thin layer of wellness on top of it. But it's not good enough. Health is not an app. And I think the way we're going to begin to reverse the direction of the river is when we truly value health. We truly value it, and then we express that value by embedding it throughout all of our designs. Instead of treating health like an app, we need to build it deep into our operating system, build it into our OS. And what that means is actually confronting all those fundamental patterns of everyday life. Not taking them as givens, not saying they've always been this way, it's always going to be this way. But let's take a look at where they came from, because they did come from somewhere. There's a great quote from Winston Churchill. He says, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And you could replace buildings with technologies, and it would still be true, and perhaps even literally true. But you can draw a straight line from Henry Ford and the Model T to suburbs that look like this, to the fact that 85% of us get to work each day like this. From this sort of magical invention of this box that has moving pictures that come from the sky, to the 5 or 6 hours on average that Americans spend watching TV each day. And it's a much shorter line, but there's Steve Jobs in 2007 announcing the iPhone and the behavior we now all recognize around us, the infamous eye slouch. So what would it mean to build health into the OS? It would mean imagining how we could use technology to redesign and reshape our daily routines, and to do so with health as an explicit design goal. And there are a couple of different ways of doing that, or thinking about that. One is what I would call the direct way, which is we identify certain healthy behaviors, and then we design experiences using technology to facilitate and elicit those. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The second is more of an indirect way, in which we actually take products and services that are not really about health, but ask ourselves, how might we design them differently if health were a goal? And I want to give you a quick example. This is Google Maps, and this is me asking Google Maps for directions from Penn Station to an office that's about 10 blocks away. And Google gives me driving directions, which is, not optimal on a number of levels. But I think one of the key things here is that, it's 10 blocks, right? Why not default to walking directions, right? And partly what you do when you make it a default is you actually start to make it seem normal. That's what people do, and you could even set it as a preference. If it's under 15 minutes, I'll walk. You might want to set it at 20, or somebody might want to set it at 10. And I'm not trying to throw shade at Google here. I think they've actually done some interesting experimentation around this. I think they're trying. My point, actually, is that Google Maps is not a health product. It's not about health. It's about directions, getting from here to there. But if you think about it with health as a core value, you design differently. So let me get into the more direct approach, and I'm going to give what I call a starter set of 5 behaviors. And a quick disclaimer on these are all evidence-based in the sense that we know they're all good for us. I won't pretend that it is a rank-ordered list of the well-quantified, most important impacts of behaviors. So the first is cooking real food, and I do mean cooking, and I do mean real food. So this is not microwaving the prepared frozen food package. I think we all know that cooking meals is becoming a lost art in the U.S. Prepared food sales are up, fast food sales are up, and these are long-term trends. There was a stat recently that said that I think on any given day, 36% of Americans eat at least one fast food meal. Right? But it's not hard to understand why when you think about it. Think about everything that's involved in cooking dinner, right? All the way from imagining what you want, to finding a recipe, to getting the ingredients, to preparing them, to cooking them, to, God forbid, cleaning up. There's a lot that goes on, and it's easy to see why that would be hard. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to take that process and shrink it and make it easier and faster and more delightful. Second is moving around, and I don't mean more workouts. I don't mean more exercise. I mean building movement into everyday life. Lieberman, the biologist I mentioned before, has a rant about this. He says that never in the history of our species have we voluntarily wasted physical energy by running around in circles. It's a completely unnatural thing for us to do. We're actually designed to use our energy for things like acquiring food, building and maintaining shelter, and occasionally reproducing. Everything else, we're taught to conserve it, right? And so when we exercise, I mean, I love exercise personally, but asking people to exercise is asking them to be unnatural. I think there's tremendous opportunity to build movement into everyday life, particularly through things like transportation. And how do you make things like active transportation modes, public transportation, as easy and delightful as hopping in a car, if you find hopping in a car easy and delightful. The next is sleeping. I think as a country we are getting way too little sleep, and it's easy to imagine why. There's a lot of stuff going on to keep us up. There was actually a quote from Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix once, who said, "Our 3 main competitors at Netflix are Hulu, HBO, and sleep." So it's good to know there's a team of engineers and product designers and content producers who are hell-bent on making sure that you stay up longer each night. But again, I think there is opportunity here, particularly as we get into sort of the smart home era of how do you work on the atmospheric conditions, the environmental conditions that make it easier for people to go to sleep. Fourth is building social connection, and you can guess that I'm probably not talking about Facebook likes or Snapchat streaks, but real relationships with family, with friends, with neighbors. And then the last I'd mention is spending time outdoors. This is an interesting area of emerging research that shows that there's a variety of benefits that come from just being outdoors, right? Being in nature turns out to be about the best thing you can do for yourself, but even spending some time in a city park or just standing on your back porch or your deck or wherever you are on the street is good for you. So 3 things I want to say about these behaviors. First of all, they're really not all about health per se, right? They're about living your life. Second is they're not horrible, miserable behaviors that no one ever wants to do. They're actually pretty enjoyable. It's just they're often a little less convenient, maybe a little less compelling than the alternatives that have been marketed to us. And then the third is all 5 have been shown to improve mental health. So how might we make some of this happen with technology? I'm going to give a few examples, and I want to say that these examples I don't hold out as ideals, but I think they're illustrative of the direction that I think we can move. So the first is prepared meal kits like HelloFresh and Blue Apron. I think there are issues in terms of pricing and in terms of package waste and that sort of thing. But again, if you think about that long process of figuring out how to cook dinner, it really shrinks that, makes that a lot easier. So it's a step in the right direction. Electric bikes, again, in a very similar way. What electric bikes do is they lower the bar to a healthy behavior. So if you live in a hilly area, or maybe you would like to bike to work, but it's just a little further than your range in terms of what you feel comfortable with your own pedal power, it can kind of take the edge off, make that accessible, and make that kind of behavior more available to more people. Next is Flux. I don't know how many know the product Flux, but it's an extension you can add to your laptop that removes the blue light at sort of a certain time every evening for you. And the blue light has been shown to suppress melatonin, which is the hormone that helps you go to sleep. So what I like about this is it's not an app that tells you it's time to go to sleep. All right? It's not nagging you. It's actually subtly changing the conditions that make it more conducive to sleeping. This is Park Time. It's not actually a product or a service you can buy. It was an experiment that was done by Sidewalk Labs. And an interesting idea, it is for parents with kids who live near, let's say, a city park, who you can join a list and then you would get pinged when other kids or parents show up at the park. And so the idea is to sort of, if you've had kids and tried to get them bundled up and take them to the park, and then you get there and no one's there, you know what I'm talking about. But the idea is it draws people together that way. And what's cool about it is it's getting people outdoors, moving around, and being social. And then the last one I'd mention is Pokemon Go. And what I love about Pokemon Go is it has nothing to do with health, right? It's a game. It's fun. People do it because it's entertaining. And yet what it does is it gets them outdoors, moving around, and often with friends. So I'm going to conclude by saying something pretty obvious, which is we live in an age of technological marvel. It's extraordinary, the technology that we see all around us. We carry supercomputers around in our pockets. We make phone calls from our wristwatches. We have virtual reality. We have augmented reality. We have the Internet of Things. We have extraordinary breakthroughs in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we're even on the dawn of a revolution in materials engineering and 3D digital fabrication. So we don't yet know how all of these and other technologies are going to come together to form the products and the services that will define the new normal of our everyday lives. But we know that they will. And how they will is going to be shaped by values, either explicitly or implicitly. So I think we need to be really explicit about this. We need to have that conversation about what we want the future of our everyday lives to look like and what values will shape them. Let's embrace health as a core value and adopt it as an explicit design goal. And if we can do that, I believe we're going to reverse the direction of the river. Thank you very much.